You mentioned earlier, Matthew Dalton, how Macron's handling of the COVID pandemic. We began this conversation about the fact that we're edging towards mandatory vaccination, and it's interesting because the far right's not talking about that issue. They're only talking about one issue right now, really.
Well, that's the issue that, particularly in the case of Zemmour, has animated his entire, arguably his career, but in particular his campaign, is immigration, national identity. And I think it's a big question about whether that issue by itself, or that kind of collection of issues by itself, is enough to propel him to the Elysee. And I think opinion polls show that arguably it isn't enough, that people care about a lot of other things, like, for example, your management of the government, COVID, your competence in those areas. And so, your economic policy. I think Zemmour hasn't really been talking a lot about that, but he's actually quite liberal economically, and arguably too liberal for France. Sort of one of the things that differentiates him from Le Pen. So I think, once those issues, and once he's confronted with a debate and has to come up with a more rounded campaign platform, I think that there's probably a ceiling to his support. The same way there's a ceiling to Marine Le Pen's support. I don't think
the same day that Zemmour was offering up his apocalyptic warnings on immigrants Wednesday, France was honoring an icon, Josephine Baker, entering the Pantheon. That's where the Republic buries its greats. It's on the left bank in Paris. Her rags to riches tale, from abject poverty in St. Louis, Missouri, to worldwide fame on the music hall stage, a war hero in the service of the resistance, a civil rights campaigner brought to life by her signature song, J'ai deux amours, my two loves, my country and Paris. It was wearing her French military uniform that Josephine Baker would speak at the same podium in 1963 where Martin Luther King would give his I Have a Dream address. France's president saluting in her, an aspirational tale that's both universal and French, he says.
You enter our pantheon because you were born American. But deep down, there is no one more French than you.
It's a very American way, though, of looking at things. You, too, can rise up and become a national hero.
Yes, indeed. I just want to touch upon the dichotomy between Zemmour declaring he wants to run for president and Josephine Baker being honoured, the first black woman to enter the Pantheon. It's almost as if France is sort of stuck between two directions. On the one hand, it could embrace a man who rejects immigration. On the other hand, it's embracing a woman, who's the image of immigration. I think her story is just so inspiring. Number one, and she was rejected in the US, and the French loved her, and she was able to really make a life and a career for herself, and so yes, as a black woman myself, I think she's a great model, and it's France next year will have to choose which direction does it want to go in. Does it want to be an open country, or does it want to on the other hand
Nico Hydes,
protectionist?
What's the view on your side of the channel when you see that we have a pantheon where we bury our greats like Victor Hugo and Marie Curie, and B, that Josephine Baker is welcomed into it?
Well, I think it's great. I don't know if she must be the most badass person in the Pantheon, but she's certainly up there in terms of historical figures. And I can't believe no one has made a kind of great, sexy, exciting, dramatic, big Hollywood movie about her life, because, I mean, she really is one of the great icons. I guess, in fact, in answer to my question, probably because it makes her life story makes the US look absolutely awful in comparison to France. And it's very interesting because the two countries obviously were quite similar, way back in the 1700s, these two young democracies kind of writing a constitution and trying to form a nation that they thought would hold and would protect liberty for the ensuing hundreds of years. And of course, America went so catastrophically wrong that somebody as wonderful as Josephine Baker was allowed to perform on stage and was hooted and laughed at and cheered, but wasn't allowed to have a drink with members of the audience in a bar next door. She had to come to Europe to get that. And I do think, when you look at the likes of Zemmour, it is crucial to remember that historical difference that France has been a leading light in the ways that other young democracies have not managed.